direct real-time signals intelligence and electronic assistance to the Iranians.
So we're fighting a proxy war with China right now.
It's a world war. At the end of the day, the real winner of this conflict is China.
Of course.
This is the end of American military power for a generation.
Welcome back, guys. So on the Tucker Carlson podcast, they said something that Washington doesn't want you to hear. America's fighting a proxy war with China. It's a world war, and China will be the real winner. And you know what? They're right. National security analyst Brandon Weichert confirming that the United States is engaged in World War III. It's just being fought through Iran instead of directly. So today we're going to break down exactly how China is helping Iran bleed America dry. And more importantly, we're going to answer the question that should terrify every American. Is this the end of American military power? Let's get into it.
So what about the question of hypersonic weapons? You read that Iran has them. They've been given them.
Oh, yeah, they've got them. In fact, I got an interesting report from overseas yesterday. And again, these I'm sort of... I take with a grain of salt, but they've been right. And when they're right, though, they're really right. This one came from our friends in Russia, so take from this what you will. But the report that I received was a retired Russian general is telling the press over there that he knows for a fact there's a cluster of Chinese high-tech officers or technical officers on the ground in Iran right now, perfecting and maintaining Iran's they're still building them, growing hypersonic weapons capability.
All right, let's start here. Tucker Carlson, the man who spent years calling China a catastrophe for the United States, is now sitting there nodding along as his guest explains that Chinese military officers are on the ground in Iran, helping them build hypersonic weapons. The cognitive dissonance must be physically painful. But here's the thing. Weichert is right. Iran's Fateh 2 hypersonic glide vehicle, unveiled by the IRGC and confirmed in combat use, reaches speeds of Mach 15 with a range of over 1,400 kilometers. That's a verified weapons system that has been used in this conflict. And Iran is also in advanced discussions to purchase China's DF-17 hypersonic glide missile to supplement its own stockpile. The Chinese technical officers on the ground aren't just advisors, they're weapons testers. Every missile Iran fires at a US base is a data point that goes straight back to Beijing. China is getting real-world combat data on how its hypersonic systems perform against US air defenses without firing a single shot, without risking Chinese lives, without triggering direct U.S. retaliation.
And the reason is because the Chinese want to test these systems because they're basically very similar to the Chinese ASBM, which of course, when and if, and I really hope it's if, the war with China erupts, the first thing the Chinese are going to do after they knock out our satellites and disrupt our electromagnetic frequencies is they're going to use thousands of ASBMs ringed in those man-made islands to either keep our carriers at bay so that we can't launch planes in range, or to sink or destroy the carrier's flight deck. And the Iranians are Iran rather is the test bed, the same way that we've been using Ukraine as a test bed against Russian tech. And so the Iranians have them. They're buried in those underground missile cities. They have not really fired them. I believe they fired 4 ballistic missiles at the carrier after Khamenei was killed. That was a symbolic attack, though. If the Iranians really wanted to go ham on the carrier with a missile swarm, they absolutely could. The only thing that would be preventing them was if we had degraded their C2 functions enough. And at that time, I don't believe we had.
What's a C2 function?
I'm sorry. That's command and control. So basically their ability to control their systems and issue commands. That's why before the war began, the Iranians basically the government said to their local field commanders, we're going to give you permission to take command of your individual missile batteries so that if something like killing Khamenei happens, you can just start going and you won't have to call in for orders or for range. And by the way, the Chinese are using their Yaogan, I think it's their Yaogan satellite constellation to do surveillance of the carrier and of the U.S. air bases in the region, and they are providing increasingly accurate targeting sets to the Iranians. In fact, I believe the reason the Iranian missiles have been so effective in damaging our bases, and boy, have they done a doozy. It is not being reported accurately. They have done a real doozy to these bases. It's because of the fact that the Chinese are providing direct real-time signals intelligence and electronic assistance to the Iranians.
Now, this is the segment that should have every Pentagon planner losing sleep, if they're being honest with themselves, really. Brandon just confirmed what we've been saying all along. Every missile that hits a US base is giving China's military planners real-world data on how American air defenses perform, where the gaps are, and how to improve their own systems. Let's talk about the ASBMs. China's DF-21D, the carrier killer, has a range of between 1450 and 1550 kilometers and is specifically designed to hit moving aircraft carriers. The DF-26B extends that range to over 3,000 kilometers, putting Guam in range. These missiles are deployed on China's artificial islands in the South China Sea, and the data China is collecting from Iran's missile strikes on US bases right now is going directly into improving the targeting algorithms for those systems. And the satellite intelligence piece? Brandon mentions the Yaogan constellation, China's reconnaissance satellite network providing real-time targeting data to Iranian forces. Let me be specific about what this means. China has 144 plus Yaogan satellites in orbit as part of a 300 plus satellite surveillance constellation. The most advanced, Yaogan 41, operates in geostationary orbit and can achieve 2.5 to 15 meter resolution, enough to identify car-sized objects and track aircraft in real time. But here's the critical part. A Chinese intelligence company called Mizar Vision publicly posted the exact locations of US military aircraft and installations in the Persian Gulf region, and then within days, those exact same facilities were targeted by Iranian missiles and drones. The Iranians have access to 1 meter resolution satellite imagery, with multiple images per minute of US military targets, and the data is flowing directly from China's satellite constellation to Iranian targeting systems. This is integrated warfare. This is what a modern military alliance looks like when one partner has the technology and the other has the battlefield. China provides the eyes, Iran pulls the trigger, the US takes the hit, and China learns everything it needs to know for the next round.
So we're fighting a proxy war with China right now.
It's a world war. I mean, this is a world war. And the Chinese are more than happy to see us stew. Now, there's this like story that the politicians keep telling us. It's really the Republican side that keeps saying this, that, well, you know, we went after Venezuela and we went after Iran, and that's going to really kill China because they rely on these countries for their oil. It's not really accurate. The Chinese got less than, I think, 4% of their oil from Venezuela. It was a nuisance, if anything, to lose. If anything, they were sinking more money into rebuilding the refining capacity because the communists had ruined the oil industry in Venezuela over 25 years. And then with Iran, they get at most, I think 14% of their oil and natural gas from Iran. What they were doing is the Chinese knew, because they could read the room, they knew we were going in. So what they started doing was shifting their purchases of oil from Iran to places like neighboring Russia and to other Middle Eastern countries. In fact, I think that the largest amount of oil purchased by China in Saudi Arabia occurred 2 weeks before the war began. So while this will hurt the Chinese, absolutely, economically, it's not going to trigger a collapse. It's not going to, the Chinese were prepared for this, just as the Russians were prepared for what we were going to throw at them in 2022. These regimes have been studying us for years, and they know our pressure points.
Brandon just accidentally made the strongest possible case for why China is going to come out of this conflict stronger. Let me break down what he actually said. So he's right. China gets roughly 14 to 70% of its total oil imports from Iran. But here's what he's underselling. China buys over 90% of Iran's total oil exports. Okay? And China knew the US was coming. So what did China do? China did what every strategic power should do. It pre-positioned. It shifted purchases to Russia and Saudi Arabia before the war started. The largest Saudi oil purchase in history happened 2 weeks before the first strike. Now that's preparation. And when Brandon says this will hurt China economically, let's be honest about what that means. China's economy is the largest by purchasing power parity at $43 plus trillion, compared to the US at $31 trillion. A temporary disruption in oil supply is a headache, but not a collapse. More importantly, China is transitioning to renewables faster than any other major economy. By 2030, China will have 1,200 plus gigawatts of renewable capacity, making it significantly less dependent on oil imports than it is today. Meanwhile, the US is spending billions on military operations, disrupting global shipping, and watching its military bases get turned to rubble. Who's actually getting hurt here? The Republicans keep saying we'll hurt China by going after Iran. Brandon just admitted that's wrong. China read the room, as he said, prepared for this scenario, and is now sitting back watching the US drain its military stockpiles in a conflict that China is learning from in real time. In a few months, we shall see which country will be hurting.
And, we're like the gentle giant. We're like the lovable giant. We're just too stupid to realize, these people are serious and they're killers. They're killers.
Wait, hold up. Let's talk about who the real killers are. The US just killed over 150 schoolgirls in a single airstrike on an Iranian school, and CNN's investigation confirms US military responsibility. That's one airstrike, one day, one school. But since 2000, the US has killed over 940,000 people in the Middle East through direct war violence in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and Pakistan. In Iraq alone, 200,000 civilians died. So who's the real killer here?
And, we're trying to lecture the world about, transgendered rights in Namibia. And, these guys are playing hardball and they're playing for keeps. And I was actually speaking to Brendan O'Reilly, who's probably one of the foremost China scholars, real world intelligence type scholar practitioner. He wrote a great book called Everyone is Wrong About China. And I just talked to him this afternoon. And he tells me he's convinced that at the end of the day, the real winner of this conflict is China.
Of course.
That we are going, yeah. And I think actually this conflict, worst case scenario, because you laid out a pretty bleak scenario too, but worst case scenario is this is the end of American military power for a generation.
China doesn't need to fire a single shot to win this war. China just needs the US to exhaust itself, and that's exactly what's happening in this proxy war. Every missile the US fires at Iran costs money. Every base that gets damaged costs money to rebuild. Every sortie costs fuel, maintenance, and wear on equipment. And while the US is bleeding treasure and military readiness in the Persian Gulf, China is sitting in the Pacific watching, learning, and preparing for the moment when this proxy war becomes direct. This is the Sun Tzu playbook. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. China is not fighting America directly. Not yet. China is watching America fight itself into exhaustion through a proxy war it didn't see coming. And the Pentagon knows it. They just can't say it out loud.
Because I don't think we really know how many hypersonic weapons they've got. I would imagine they've got at least 100 or so, because they've been just churning them out. And the Chinese have been helping them. And of course, the Chinese have overmatch with us in terms of industrial mass production.
Industrial mass production. Those three words should terrify every defense analyst in Washington. Let's talk about what industrial overmatch actually means. China's manufacturing output is the largest in the world, accounting for roughly 30% of global manufacturing. The US accounts for about maybe 14 or 16%. In the specific context of weapons production, China has been building out its defense industrial base at a pace that the US simply cannot match. China launched 92 rockets in 2025, a national record. China is building ships at a rate that dwarfs US naval production. And now Brandon is confirming that China is helping Iran churn out hypersonic weapons at scale. This is the fundamental strategic problem the US faces. America can win individual battles. America has decent technology in many areas. But China can produce more. China can sustain longer. China can replace losses faster. And in a prolonged conflict, which is exactly what Iran is designed to create, industrial capacity wins. Iran just needs to survive. China just needs to keep supplying. And the US needs to keep spending. The math doesn't work in America's favor.
What is the damage right now to Israel and to U.S. bases in the Gulf, do you think?
Oh, well, the bases in the Gulf, I wish I had kept the window open that I was reading, but basically at least 3 of the bases have been devastated. The 5th Fleet headquarters, I am told, and if you look at the satellite imagery that you can find on open source information, it looks like, actually the base in Bahrain looks like Gaza. It's completely moonscape.
The satellite imagery is public available and it is devastating. The U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, the command center for all U.S. naval operations in the Persian Gulf, has been struck repeatedly and the damage is extensive. The Maritime Executive reported that the satellite imaging reveals damage more significant than initially estimated. The New York Times confirmed that several structures at the 5th Fleet headquarters were destroyed, and the Middle East Monitor reported that Iran's Revolutionary Guard claimed to have destroyed the command building and headquarters entirely. This is the systematic destruction of U.S. military infrastructure by a nation that the U.S. establishment spent decades calling backward and incapable. The same nation currently identified as having 3,000 plus missiles and an integrated defense network backed by China and Russia. And here's what Brandon said: it's not being reported accurately. The United States of Israel is managing the information. The damage is worse than what's being acknowledged publicly. Satellite imagery doesn't lie. Open source intelligence doesn't lie. The base in Bahrain looks like Gaza.
Worst part here, one of the worst parts is I have a colleague who's in the Gulf states, and he tells me, he sent me a picture of the warning he got from the State Department to get out, and to cut to the chase, it basically said you're on your own to get out. Like, we're not doing flights.
That's true.
And meanwhile, I hear that until 24 hours ago, the British government was evacuating their people, no
That's
questions
correct.
asked.
That's
so
right.
you mean to tell me that the sole superpower is picking a fight with this missile city that is Iran, and we're not even going to provide exfiltration for our people? That's not an empire. That's not a superpower. That's a power in decline. That's what the Chinese see, by the way. And the Chinese think their time is at hand because we are committing national suicide with this insanity.
Power in decline. Let that land. Now, Brandon just described the U.S. government telling its own citizens in a war zone, you're on your own. Meanwhile, Britain, a country I'm not a fan of, and a country the U.S. constantly lectures about its special relationship and its military obligations, was evacuating its people without hesitation. No questions asked. And it's not just China that sees this. The whole world is seeing this. Every time the U.S. fails to protect its own people, every time American military infrastructure gets destroyed and the government downplays it, every time the U.S. overextends itself in a conflict it didn't need to start, the world takes note. China takes note.
I wish I could disagree. It's one of the saddest things I've
I
ever
wish I
seen
didn't have to say these things.
in my
I don't
life.
take
No,
any
I
joy.
totally agree. And you think of the men whose lives are going to be taken, Americans who are like the best people.
Already have been.
Well, already have been. And you look at, I think the DoD has only released the hometowns of 4 of them, I think, but it's like Iowa, a couple from, it's like the best people we have.
These are our people. Right?
No
This is
private
like-
equity kids in that group, I
That's
notice.
right. Trump came out on Saturday. He's repeated it since. The aims are regime change. The aims are denuclearization, and the aims are getting rid of the ballistic missile system. He's now added on getting rid of the Navy of Iran. So those 4 objectives. What is the objective of the Iranian regime? Survive. That's all they have to do. Survive long enough because they know, because the Chinese and Russians are giving them the intel, they know that our stockpiles are about to be depleted. So all they have to do is hold out until we have to start cannibalizing Indo-PACOM, and there's going to be a real political fight at that point. I'm told that Indo-PACOM leaders are already raising quite a stink behind the scenes because they know once those systems are gone out of their arsenal, they ain't coming back anytime soon.
Here's what the data tells us. Iran is not going to lose this war. Iran's strategy is to survive. And with China and Russia providing intelligence, technology, and industrial support, survival is exactly what Iran is going to do. Meanwhile, the US is watching its bases turn into rubble, its stockpiles get depleted, and its Indo-Pacific command gets stripped of the weapons it needs to, quote-unquote, deter China in the Pacific. Well, the multipolar world isn't coming. It's here. And even Tucker Carlson can see it now. Well, guys, if you made it this far, you already know the mainstream media isn't giving you the full picture. Drop a comment below. I want to know, do you think Iran can hold out long enough to force the US to choose between the Persian Gulf and the Pacific? And share this video, because the people who need to see this the most are the ones who aren't looking for it. Thanks for watching, guys.